Good morning, everybody. Let's try that again. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Vegas. My name is Paul Kautza. I'm the Director of Education for the Data Warehousing Institute. I'm the guy responsible for all the classes and instructors you guys are in this week. So if you like them, come tell me. If you don't, come tell me even more. But we're trying to set up an experience of learning for you in the classrooms. We also have our Executive Summit this week, which will be upstairs. But we, in addition to the education time here, it's really, really important that you guys network with each other, because I can guarantee you somebody in this room has run into a problem that you guys have and has either solved it or figured out different ways around it. So there's a lot of networking opportunities, a lot of networking time here. Just by a show of hands, how many people, is this your first TDWI event? How many of you have been to 3 or more TDWI events? Everybody look at those hands. Those are the hands you want to seek out to see how they can get the best value out of your 6 days here. So I've got some announcements this morning. Classes tomorrow will start at 8 o'clock. And the breakfast all week will be right out where breakfast is today, but the breakfast will be out 30 minutes ahead of those classes. So 8 a.m. tomorrow. All the World Conference courses are on this floor with the exception of 2. They're right at the top of the escalator to your left. And if you're attending the Executive Summit this week, that's up the escalator just to your right if you go forward to your right. And I was asked to make this announcement based on lunch yesterday, because lunch you're on your own today and Thursday and Friday. But apparently there's some long lines. So there is a bunch of sit-down restaurants right by Caesar's Palace, but if you go to your left by the casino out to the Forum Shops, there's a fairly large food court there with a lot of different options in it, okay? So with that, I also want to make another announcement. How many women do we have in the audience today? Terrific. Well, we've got a special event tonight that we put together for the first time, and it's called Women in BI, Having It All or Making Hard Choices. We have a very good panel, 3 of our distinguished faculty members from TDWI, and it's going to be at 7 o'clock tonight in Octavius 5, which is just up at the top of the escalator. There'll be some light refreshments, and we're going to have a panel discussion. And on our panel, we have Cindy Housen, who is founder of BI Scorecard. This is kind of her brainchild. She's done a lot of work to put this together. Claudia Emhoff, who's the founder of Intelligent Solutions. Laura Reeves, who's the founder of Starsoft Solutions. And then we have 3 business executives. Teresa Marvin is a senior BI developer at Fannie Mae. Jessica Throde, Director of Enterprise Travel Data Warehouse and Business Intelligence Solutions for Sabre Holdings. And Elizabeth Garvey, Director of Information Services at Allstate Insurance. So it should be a really good, lively discussion with some light refreshments. So we ask that you join them at 7 o'clock tonight, if you would. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce this morning's keynote speaker, Evan Levy. I've known Evan for quite a few years. Evan is a partner and co-founder of Baseline Consulting, a boutique BI consulting and data governance firm. Evan works with senior executives to help them understand the strategic importance of enterprise information and has tackled strategy and management issues at Verizon, Hallmark, GlaxoSmithKline, and Lowe's. Evan is also the co-author of the book Customer Data Integration, Reaching a Single Version of the Truth, and writes the Inside IT blog at evanlevy.com. Evan has been a distinguished faculty member at the Data Warehousing Institute since 2004 and judges industry best practices awards, including the Best Practice Award for TDWI. So how many people have been in, has anybody been in Evan's classes? There's a few of you. So when Evan comes up here, it really is him. He just, for some reason, his face looks a little different, but it really is him. So Evan is currently the Vice President of Business Consulting at SAS, which acquired Baseline in 2011. And with that, I give you Evan Levy.
Good morning. Let's make sure you can hear me correctly. Yeah, it's interesting. For those of you that have met me in the past, the word distinguished and my name don't typically go together, but we'll work through that today. One of the things that I thought we would talk about is the challenges of whether you want to call it big data or lots of data. I'm not a very good jokester, not very good with riddles, but it's really fascinating how you ask somebody, do you have big data? I'm going to do something that most people can't stay away from. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands today. I'm not going to give you any questions. But what's fascinating is how many of you would claim not to have big data, or you work with people that don't have big data? No, everybody's got big data, regardless of how large it is. Typical environment, as you can see, yes, I've got all my operational platforms, all my big application systems, all the creators of content. But what a lot of people are losing sight of is that's not where most of my data is anymore. In fact, over the next 4 or 5 years, there's this belief that, in fact, more than half of the applications that we have will actually be external systems. Good, bad, or indifferent, I'm not really here to argue that. So when you consider some of the challenges that we have in managing and dealing with data, that, whether it goes into our data warehouse or to the actual end users themselves, we don't create it anymore. In fact, one of the challenges, if you take a look at managing the data content that we have, if you pull a page out of the supply chain world, grocers 25 years ago, a store manager actually not only had to deal with keeping product on the shelf, dealing with everybody's time card, making sure he staffed the store correctly, he also had to deal with suppliers. In this day and age, no grocer would have stores manage the supply chain for every individual store. It's impractical. In fact, Albertsons, that grocer that existed once upon a time, said, you know, we can't survive as a business, Kmart too, we can't survive as a business if we expect store managers to deal with knowing all the different suppliers, knowing what products to purchase, deal with payments and all those other things. It's impractical to the person that's dealing with the end consumer to deal with everything all the way back to the vendor. The reason I pull the page about a supply chain out is if you consider some of the things that you guys have to deal with. You not only have to deal with the end users, making sure they can deal with the data, consume it, report on it, fold, spindle, and mutilate it, but you also have to worry about all the pieces and parts all the way back to the supplier. If you take a look at any other industry, you take a look at any other piece of technology for that matter, what you'd find is most industries realize that the actual supply chain of the goods and products that are being sold are managed separately from the actual selling and management of the products themselves. So I bring that point up because if we also know that more than half of our systems are going to be external systems, and in fact the way that I measured, managed, and rewarded is making sure business users can answer questions, maybe we need to take a look at the movement of the data itself in a slightly different fashion. In fact, while we've all heard about the petabytes or the zettabytes of data that we have, or are supposed to have, what worries me is not the sheer volume and quantity. In this day and age, we all have multi-million row tables, multi-billion row tables. But the thing that worries me is the quantity of sources themselves. Because 5 or 6 years ago, let's say we had 20 or 30 sources. I wish that was our problem in 5 or 6 years. Now it's fairly common that end users want data from third-party subscription companies. I want household, I want firmographics, I want psychographics. I actually go buy content from companies. I'm dealing with third-party apps, whether it be something like Salesforce or something like Facebook. The quantity of sources themselves are becoming overwhelming. And let me tell you about this little secret that everybody understands and knows about. I can't put all the data in one place. Not disputing the value of a data warehouse. I've been working in this space for almost 30 years. It's not that the data warehouse isn't wonderfully valuable and highly successful. It absolutely is. But the challenge is I have more data sources popping up every day. And the time necessary to put it into a warehouse is always going to lag what a user wants. And we all know that users can do amazing things with Excel and every other end user tool. So the fact is, if I know I can't move every piece of data into the warehouse fast enough, I know they're going to want it anyway. I know I have many, many reporting systems and data marts. And oh, by the way, for every ETL job that I have a dozen operational systems moving data back and forth. Maybe the answer to deal with some of this problem is focusing on how do we move data easier? How do we make it easier to move data back and forth? Once again, how do I consider a supply chain? How do I make moving the data a simple concept? If you look at some of today's best practices, and I like little animation and dots, what happens today? Well, if System A wants data, The people that own system may actually have to go figure out where the data is, go to the other two systems, write code, and move data back and forth. Those are those two little purple dots. Point-to-point connection, whether it be a message bus, whether it be a queue, whether it be tape, whether it be DVDs, whether it be a file, God knows how. So what happens? Another system wants data? Well, they go and they find it from the other two systems. So what ends up happening is I have this multitude, and pardon me, this rat's nest of code going back and forth. And it's not that any one program is highly complex and difficult, of course. The real challenge is, how do I know about all the programs moving all the data? Think about the Postal Service. Think about FedEx. They actually do know where every package is on every truck and where every truck is at any given point in time. Do we even know where all our customer data is inside our infrastructure? And I'm not here to throw rocks, but think about it. How much data is really moving back and forth? And how has it gotten more and more complicated over time? Now, obviously, if we all knew that we were going to have 18 different copies of data moving back and forth, we would have designed it correctly. So it's not about doing anything wrong. It's the environment's evolved. We've got business users now that are perfectly comfortable taking 2 or 3 files and merging it into Excel themselves. That wasn't the case 10 years ago. I mean, I remember the stories where you tell the user, please move the mouse up over the phone, and so they pick the mouse up off the desktop and say, well, nothing's happening. I mean, that's not really a problem anymore. Users actually get data. They understand this stuff. In fact, they're dangerous because they can merge and integrate files incorrectly. They have enough information to hurt themselves. The point that I'm trying to make here is this is what's happening today. Because we spend all this energy trying to make sure that I've either got data in the warehouse or I'm setting up reports or tools to deliver information. And unfortunately, we tend to build this whole interconnect infrastructure from scratch every time. It's always a one-off activity. So the worry that I have is we're consuming all this people time, creating all this complexity. How many times do we actually need to move the data? Here's a quote in Forbes magazine that I think gives you the perspective that I'm trying to hit on. The vast majority of big data is duplicated. A leading medical research facility generates 100 terabytes of data from various instruments. You know, it's really funny. We think about operational systems, it's billing systems, accounting systems, but think about all the devices in your office that generate content. I mean, if you want big data, could you ever imagine tracking a mouse on your desktop or the touchpad? That would be big data. Well, think about all the monitoring equipment inside a hospital room. And you want to capture and collect all that stuff because you'll want to go back and look at the monitoring details of the patient. So we've got 100 terabytes. It's copied by 18 research departments. Now, someone might say, well, yeah, that doesn't happen in my environment. I've got all my data on my data warehouse, and it's good, clean data, and it's there. And how many of you are brave enough to say there's no chance that when someone runs a query off my data warehouse and pulls a file or pulls data, it's never copied again? Once again, not here to throw stones, but the perspective of look at the sheer quantity. And then what happens with the expansion of 5 terabytes of more added value content, and you read through the rest of it, so we now have 10 petabytes of content. And we actually have conflicting sources. And why does this happen? Because those 18 departments that then pass data on didn't know there was one place they could get the data to begin with. Or the people that they're providing data to didn't know, where's the one place that I should get data? Let me go pull another page now from the, let's try that again. The supply chain perspective. When you get a pencil or a pen from the supply cabinet in your company, you know you can go to a supply cabinet. You don't have to place an order. You don't have to call anybody. Well, why is that? Because the people that you work with realize that'd be a tremendous waste of time. Why would we want to have every staff member pick up the phone or go drive to Staples or Office Depot or wherever to pick up a box of pens? Because the time is value. Why do I want to waste that time? Think about how much time you're spending or users are spending finding the data. And finding the data is not their job. But they have to do it to be able to get the job done. There's been several studies done. In fact, typical business user, 40% of their time is spent finding the data they want to analyze. And 20 to 30% of their time is spent defending that the data that they got is the right data. How many of you have never had an argument? Don't raise your hand. Don't raise your hand. It's a rhetorical question. And I told you at the beginning, distinguished and me, no, and no one would ever think I'd use the word rhetorical. Anyway, how many of you haven't had to deal with a report where someone says, I don't believe this data. It happens every day. Where did it come from? These numbers are wrong. I don't understand this. Anyway, the point that I want to also drive towards is, well, if we know the data is growing 60% a year, and I've got not only volume growth, but breadth of growth. And like I said, the breadth of growth is what scares me, because if I have 15 sources, how many different ways can people integrate that data differently? It's a lot. I also have the circumstance where I've got all these application systems moving outside the company. And that doesn't scare me. But you have an enormous level of convenience when I need to go get data. Well, I go call the guy or go talk to somebody who says, please give me the file. Suddenly, when that's an outsourced platform or it's something like Salesforce.com, I can't go just ask for a file. There's actually time involved. And in fact, I can't even prevent people from calling or writing their own web service unless I'm very, very careful. I mean, think about it. We said 5 or 6 years ago it would scare us with the concept of users taking 3 files and merging them together. But they do it now all the time with Excel. How many of you are brave enough to believe that in 5 or 6 years, users aren't going to be able to write a web service or have a utility that fires off a web service to pull data back? It's going to happen. So if we know users are going to go off and get the data themselves if they can't get it, let's stop ignoring the problem or acknowledge a problem and, in fact, prevent them from hurting themselves. Let's make data like in a supply cabinet, like getting a pencil or a box of pens. Not all of the data, but the stuff that's really, really popular, so we don't have 15 different copies of customer data. Otherwise, they'll get the wrong copy. The last bullet, and the reason I bring it up is because, tragically, a lot of our budgeting process and the way we actually get our jobs done is platform-centric. I've got an application system, so I have budget for storage, I have budget for this, I have budget for that, but there's never a holistic view of the data itself. What would happen in companies if purchasing didn't have a holistic view of the commodity products that you use? Oh, no, you've got to call this person to get a pencil, but you have to call this person to get a pad of paper, and God help you if you want a phone. Is it practical to expect business people to know 15 different people to call based upon the item they want? Think about that. Is it practical to have business people or people in general know who to call when they need something in particular? Well, lo and behold, that's exactly how we manage data now. Oh, you want customer data, you have to call this person. You want product detail, you've got to call this person. Oh, wait, you want historical customer detail. You didn't tell me that. You're supposed to call this person. Once again, not here to throw rocks and stones, because we didn't know this was going to happen. This did kind of creep up on us. We thought we'd build our data warehouses, people would do reports, and we never thought they'd need a 3rd source, a 5th source, a 15th source, a 20th source. We've been pushing for 20 years, run the business by the numbers. They're doing that. And they need more numbers. So let's go to the next slide. So me being the deep thinker, yeah, if you know me, you realize I'm not a deep thinker, and said, well, you know, if I've got this challenge and this issue, and I want to be able to supply any data to any user or system at any point in time, and the other thing, let me inject into your paradigm, we're not just talking about reporting and data warehousing and data marts. We're talking about every computer system. Because for every ETL job you have, there's what, 2 dozen different point-to-point connections and operational systems. All of them have their own ETL or transformation logic, their own conversion logic, their own metadata, their own integration logic. Data warehousing doesn't worry me. I'm not concerned about that. We've spent a lot of time and energy. You're here with these classes, and you know the right way to do it. Okay, you're 1/10 of the big picture. And I don't mean from budget, I mean from quantity of data moving back and forth. You've already spent the time and done the due diligence to say, let's do this the right way and not do this 15 times. Let's educate our users on where to get the data. Great, I've educated 10%. Let's go deal with some of the other people. That means IT folks as well as business users. And the other point is, you'll never be able to solve all the problems all the time, so let's focus on the highly used, very common data and handle it like a supply chain. In fact, I grew up in Florida, and it's interesting. How many of you were worried that every time you pick up a carton of Tropicana orange juice, that it's going to taste differently? No, it always tastes the same. You ever think about what's involved with making sure that one of 155 different variety of oranges in combination always tastes the same? Let me break it to you. That's probably a lot more complicated than making sure that my customer table or my customer list always has the right list of customers. But they're able to do it. How do they do this type of stuff? Well, they've broken the supply chain into different phases. And it's really funny because we can apply data or manage data in much the same way. Raw data, source, standardize, make, and deliver. And all a supply chain is, and this is a definition out of Wikipedia, a system of organizations, people, technology, activities, and resources involved in moving a product or service from supplier to customer. By the way, this other thing about me is, honest to goodness, if someone ever gives me a definition with process in it again, I'm going to choke them to death. This isn't about process as much as all the different pieces and parts, understanding. Process is implicit, okay? So let me redraw the picture and talk about managing your data supply chain as an operational process in and of itself. Like I said, every other industry has figured out, I got to deliver the stuff to the people that use it so they can do their job. Look at the success of FedEx. Look at the success of UPS. UPS has an enormous logistics process. They actually warehouse and deliver products for companies outside the whole shipping process itself. It used to be if you bought a PC product or electronics, it was actually already in a warehouse. Anyway, the idea is, let me develop a system that allows and insists upon the sharing and reuse of data across the enterprise. So when someone says, I want this extract or I want this file, I don't build something custom. In fact, we had a client in Atlanta. They were 18 months into a 3-year mainframe upgrade, and they'd run out of gas again. They said, no, this was supposed to be a 3-year investment. No good. Go fix it. So they actually started and went and investigated all the batch jobs they had, and they started cleaning out 2 things. They said, thou shalt create standardized extracts, so we will get rid of every custom extract and force the developers to go fix it. Oh, that's a lot of manpower. I'm sorry, your manpower is less expensive than my 18-month loss of time on this mainframe. Because for those of you that have had the pleasure of dealing with a large server or mainframe, you're talking about a 7-figure cost item. And by the way, it's not $1 million. It's more like touching on the 8-digit level. So this is a fairly significant investment. And even with amortization and everything else, it's a lot of money. So they also cleaned out all the jobs that people didn't use anymore. But the big thing was all the specialized extracts. After they cleaned up that mess, they realized they would never have to buy another mainframe, ever. Evan, how could that be? 70% of their processing was duplicate extracts, cutting duplicate files, because everybody wanted something custom, or they weren't even aware of other files that were already being created. One of the challenges that we have in our environments is, unfortunately, data sharing is a convenience. It's a courtesy. I suspect many of you that do ETL or manage ETL teams probably have gotten the files, the source data, by calling somebody. There isn't a production process to give you the data that you want. You're hoping you can get it from somebody, so they create another file, and they create another file, and another file, and another file. How do you think Walmart could handle, what do they have, 4,000 or 5,000 stores? If every store had a different shaped bottle of ketchup, a different count roll of paper towel, put in a carton of a different size. Think about just the logistics of packing up trucks and moving them. By the way, Walmart also knows every item in every truck and where every truck is at any point in time. They broke off their supply chain from the people that handle purchasing and the people that stock the stores because they said, this is what's going to make or break us. Is this making any sense? How much of your time and how much of our budgets are spent on moving data around? So maybe with some thought, we can, now knowing what we have, knowing that half of our systems are also going to be external, I've got to build something to be able to support and reflect that it's going to be multiple systems, or pardon me, multiple news sources all the time. I work with a hedge fund out of Connecticut, and this is scary. They have 100 million data sets. Not 100 million records in a table, 100 million data sets. They're so worried about litigation and liability, if someone creates an Excel spreadsheet, they copy it, it gets timestamped, they save it. Tragically, they don't have metadata in place to go back and reuse that file. And how long does it take to create a spreadsheet? Not a problem. 100 million files. You understand how bad a problem can get and how quickly it can get that way? One of the ideas on the source phase is, let me consider all the data that I'm going to use from the outside or even internal, and let me label it. And let me not force everybody to know what the serial number of a pencil is, or the serial number of a pen. Let them call it a pencil. So if I'm buying customer data, or firmographics, or psychographics, or whatever it is, let me label it so everybody sees we call it this. Well, did it come from Axiom? Did it come from D&B? Did it come from Joe's Bar and Grill? Doesn't matter, we took care of that. Here's what the customer firmographic detail is that you'll use. So you don't have to go fish around and figure it out. And then let's label it so everybody can access it. Basically called onboarding. So now they don't have to worry about, well, is it EBCDIC or is it ASCII? What are the different field types? You do a lot of this already when you tell everybody, come get the data from the data warehouse. Because you've got tables with names, columns with names, you've cleaned a lot of it up. But I go back to, and what about the other 90%? All those other operational systems or all those users that don't use the warehouse, where do they get their data from? But the idea is it also ensures that users don't have to figure out, did we get the data? Is it there? Because every time you spend 5 minutes, there's hundreds of people downstream that are spending 5 minutes or 10 minutes or an hour. And what they learned at this hedge fund is, you know something? I'm buying data from 40 or 50 different firms. I don't want someone to have to figure out, did we get it or not? What's it called? We put it in one place, like the office supplies in the supply cabinet. They open the cabinet, is it there or not? How many of you have established all your data onboarding from all the third-party content so everybody knows where it is? It's fairly common when I've worked with clients, they find that they're householding data 9 and 10 times because different organizations have customer data and they each ship it out to the vendor and they redo it 9 times. So there's actually cost savings in a lot of this. Let's go on to the next phase. And the idea is standardize. And it's funny because we all have data hygiene or data quality or data cleansing, and unfortunately, it's not always done. Let's go back to the Walmart example. If you go buy a bottle of ketchup at Walmart, it's a particular size. They have 3 different sizes. You go to another Walmart, the same sizes. You go to another Walmart, it's the same sizes. The fact is, we all have the fun and the challenge of how is the customer data represented in this system? Is it first name? Is it first underscore name? Is it F name? Is it name underscore first? How do we identify it? How do we represent it? It's always different in every other system. Well, the whole idea is if I have a supply chain, I take care of that. No one has to read a raw dump file and figure out how to transform it with ETL code. Now, if they get it from the data warehouse, that's great. But think about all the operational systems themselves. They don't care about how the data is formatted. So it's establishing, wait a second, we call it one thing, and we cleanse and standardize it the same for everybody, and we do it once. Once. The next item is make, and this is something that a lot of people struggle with. It's like, well, I don't really build or create data in the data warehouse. I just deliver it the way the source system gives it to me. Do you have any idea of how insulting that is to a business user? I'm not responsible for the quality of data that I give to you. How would you feel if you went to a pharmacist and asked for a prescription drug like penicillin, and just before you left, the guy said, oh, by the way, I'm giving you what the manufacturer gave me, but it could be bad. It may not make you feel better. In fact, it might kill you. Now, I'm not here to be moral or ethical or all those other things. I'm challenging your paradigm. Because you're delivering the data, you're a service bureau to the business users themselves, you're not allowed to say, not my problem. Because you're undermining your own credibility. Because what happens when you tell them, all I can do is give you the quality of content that the source gives me, now the business user says, well, then why am I coming to you? You've told me I should come to the data warehouse for good, clean data. But what you're telling me is you're not going to fix, clean, or standardize it, and I'm just going to get what the source system says. No, by the way, I'm waiting time to get it from you. It seems to me that if you're not going to help me, why don't I just go directly to the source system? By the way, I know that guy. I worked with him 10 years ago. He'll give me all the data that I want. So once again, injecting a paradigm shift in your world, not to be critical, certainly not. And oh, by the way, I'm not suggesting for a moment it's easy. Oh, it sucks. Oh, that's a new one. You ever hear, it sucks on a presentation? You can't fix it all. But what I'm really suggesting is you can't ignore the problem. So we've got to figure out a way to chip away at how do we make the data incrementally better so someone doesn't have to worry, do I trust this? Do I believe this? No, I got it from the data warehouse. This stuff rocks. It's correct. It's as best as can be gotten. That's what you want the perception to be. In fact, how many of you would go borrow drugs from your neighbor rather than getting it from a pharmacy? Hell no, you're going to go to the pharmacy. You don't even want to worry about that. We have the opportunity with all the data that's in the warehouse environment to actually position as saying, you know something, go wherever you want. But if you come to me, here's what I'll assure you. I did test it. I will tell you if it got here. I do have change control. I did correct addresses, so you don't have to worry about that. And by the way, you're paying for it, and I'm happy to do that for you. Do you understand the difference of paradigm? You want to advertise that you're a pharmacy, not the back alley behind the building. The next item is just deliver, and lo and behold, we'll also package it and make it available to the business user in a manner, in a mechanism that they can use it. So instead of every business user having to figure out how to create a cube, we'll do it for them. Or in fact, if I'm delivering data to another system, I'll create the formats that they need because I'm actually doing something called data provisioning. In fact, that's what one big shift I think has occurred with data warehousing and the BI environment is we're not just delivering information to business users in the form of answering questions. We're delivering data so they can custom address their own questions. I mean, you can characterize it like, I can go to Home Depot or Lowe's and purchase a mailbox, but I can go buy the raw lumber, the hinges, and the nails, and I can build my own. Now, the goal here is not to make 80% of the audience or your population have to go build their own mailbox. But for the 10 or 20% that are more sophisticated users that can really make Excel or Tableau or ClickView or one of the zillion other tools hum, give them the data they want if that's what they want. Let's not tell them how to do their job. Let's prevent them from wasting 40% of their time finding the data. And let's prevent them from spending another 20 to 30% of their time defending it, saying that, yeah, this really is the right type of data. And how do we do that? Well, let's create a supply chain. Because we know they're going to get their own copies. We know we can't have everything in the data warehouse. So if that's the case, yeah, have them go to the data warehouse. But when someone says, but it's not there, you don't want to give them the answer, well, in 8 months, because you're now at the bottom of the list of what I have to work on, I'll put the data there. And their remark is, you don't understand, I need it next week. I mean, believe it or not, most of your users don't live and breathe data morning, noon, and night because it's fun. They probably have wives and kids and hobbies and stuff like that. And call me crazy. But they're doing it because they have to get a job done. So then how do we make sure they don't have to wait? Because that's what worries me. It's not the cost. I mean, that's going to be an argument until all of us are put into the ground. It's about the time. I can't get the time back. Whoop. So the other thing to keep in mind is if I actually apply a supply chain approach, and I've got the different phases, now, so when do I do data management? I do it all the time. At what point do you think Walmart says, we don't really need 16-ounce bottles of ketchup until they get on the shelf? No. They've standardized the product sizes and the cartons and the bottles and the labels throughout the entire process because it's easier to manage, measure, and monitor when it's all the same. I mean, could you imagine someone saying, well, we can save a lot of money here at Walmart. Let's get 55-gallon drums of ketchup and have a lot of 16-ounce bottles, and at the store, they'll just fill them up and cap them and then put them on the shelves. Oh, we can make it up in volume. That's nuts. But what do we expect our business users to do? Here, or what do the source systems expect the data warehouse ETL people to do? Here's my file. You go figure it out. And the file is kooky in shape and form because it's the way the utility extracted. So think about it. Walmart says, if you want to do business with me, you'll conform to the way the products are packaged, shipped, and labeled. But we in data warehousing, that by the way, have millions, if not billions, of distinct records, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of columns and attributes, we say, no, that's okay. We'll have every developer figure out all the data layouts from all the files from all the systems. Any of you find that a little kooky? Don't raise your hand. Do not raise your hand. This isn't rocket science, and I'm not inventing things here. And no, you can't do it on your own. I realize that. This requires cooperation from operational systems, but more importantly, this requires a level of vision from IT management saying, you know something, why aren't we addressing data movement from an economies of scale perspective? We've invested heavily with ETL tools. We've invested heavily with pipes, with enterprise service buses, and all kinds of other networking. But what we haven't yet done is say, wait a second, if you're going to package and share data with someone else, you have to package it so they understand it. Because every time you package a file, it's not used once. It's used 18 times. Use the Forbes magazine. I'm not making up the numbers. I actually suspect you'd find out in your companies, it's not 18. It's probably 180. Because, oh, by the way, that's when the file's created. What about a month later, or a year later, or 3 years later? It's fairly common to go get historical data and put it on your warehouse, and then take it off, and then put it back, and then take it off and put it back. We go after old data. So if I have these stages, I can do things like establish standards and conventions to make it easy. I have standard-sized boxes with standard-sized labels, and I can start counting the right stuff. And oh, by the way, that's where data governance is positioned. The leverage that data governance provides is the ability to put the process in place so people say, let's have a standard. Let's not force every new developer to learn all the data in every different operational system and then go out and fish for it. Okay? So the premise of governance is, let me help put the methods in place. Okay? I'll go back to, I'd like to say this is a really creative, unique concept. Anybody that picks up a supply chain book, this is exactly what they talk about. I mean, this is where guys like Ford revolutionized the automobile industry. And this is where, as the industry matured, they realized, you know something? I can't build bucket seats in shop anymore. I've got to go let someone else do it for me. The premise, too, is if I establish my data supply chain correctly, now whether the data comes from an internal system or an external system, it doesn't matter. I've got the formats and feeds defined. If I'm feeding it to an internal reporting system or a data mart or an external third party, it doesn't matter. And when someone says, who has a copy of customer data? I've got the supply chain team, they'll tell me. It's real interesting. When there's a product recall, Hunts or Heinz or whomever, they need to know who's got the ketchup. Starkist or whomever the tuna people are, if they've got a product recall, they got to know who has the product. And how many times have you guys been asked, who's got the customer data? We have a problem. We didn't know we'd need to do that 5 or 10 years ago. Well, we got to do that now, which means we have to reevaluate how are we establishing and building some of this stuff. Because we can't say, oh, well, it is in the data warehouse. We'll just fix it there. Well, but what about the 18 other systems and the systems that they spoke to and the systems that they spoke to? A couple more slides and we'll go ahead and wrap up. Like I said, there's 5 different phases to it. And the whole idea is let's manage data not as a byproduct of an application, but actually an asset itself, which means data provisioning becomes an operational process. The supply chain becomes an operational process in and of itself. By the way, this is not a unique concept to your companies. Why? Because the way backups and backup DVDs or tapes or backup media, that's typically a separately managed process. There's someone that owns the relationship to whoever the company is, Iron Mountain or whomever, and manages where all the tapes go and all that other stuff. So what we're saying is let's steal a page from that part of your operational book and say, let's not just manage data once it leaves here for backups. Let's manage it while it's in-house. Finally, I mean, the point that we're trying to make is while people perceive data as a commodity, it's not. It's a corporate asset. So we want to do a little bit more, by the way, than manage it like a box of pencils. We actually want to know where it goes. We want to be able to title and identify it correctly and simplify it. And by the way, not arguing the value of a data warehouse, not arguing the value of a data mart. It's paid for itself 100 times over. This is about this new set of needs and realize that, you know something, the goal is how do I simplify sharing and access for everybody? No, I'm not going to go, you don't give a child a sharp knife. They're going to cut themselves. So the idea isn't that we suddenly open up the supply cabinet and let anybody go get whatever they want. I mean, this is about deploying a controlled substance. So don't think like a grocery store where anybody can go pick up the data they want. Think about it like a drugstore. It's a controlled substance. You have to have a prescription. I need to make sure that you're not going to hurt yourself. And by the way, here's the data that you're allowed to have, and you go get it. You don't need a programmer involved every time. And by the way, how do you make all this stuff happen? It's with data governance. but it becomes a point of common sense, not a point of some sort of overwhelming or heavy-handed policy. This is about how do I make sure that the data people that need it, they can get it. Anyway, I have about 30 seconds, so with that, I'll just thank you for coming and enjoy your day and your lunch quest. Have a terrific morning, everybody. Thank you.